You are listening to Faithless Brewing, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the Spike Rogue. Each week we design new decks for tournament play. We put our creations to the test and share our findings on the air. Coming up on the brew session, David's creativity is unleashed on new Phyrexia, with 5 new decklists featuring Elesh Norn, Mindsplice Apparatus, All Will Be One, Unctus Grand Metatect, and much more. All of that and more is coming up on Faithless Brewing. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Faithless Brewing Podcast. I am David Robertson, and I am joined, as always, by the CEO of the Faithless Brewing Podcast. He's Dan Schreiber. Dan, what's going on, my friend?
Doing well, David. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to be seen. Spring, not here yet in Minnesota. You don't really know anything about that down in Texas, but starting to see some warm weather headed this way. A few days over 30 degrees, and everyone's in a little better mood. They're not huddled in a corner, you know, like something from a Charles Dickens novel.
Well, if it does get cold again, you have plenty to keep you occupied inside. Phyrexia All Will Be One is finally available to us. Pre-release was this past weekend or ongoing this week, and the set is now live. Well, I'm projecting to the future. As I'm saying this, the set is not live.
By the time people will hear this, the set will be live. Exactly.
Future me will be grinding away in the Magic Online queues, but
having the time of your life.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an exciting time of year. We don't know what cards are good or bad yet, right? We argue about it. Of course, to the people that don't actually create anything, it will be obvious in 6 months' time that such and such card was broken and why weren't people doing stuff with it. And of course, it's only obvious after someone shows you what it's done, right? Somebody, Andrea Mangucci or Sam Black or whoever has to actually build the deck that shows that a card is good. Arguing about it online is a thing that takes up a lot of mental bandwidth for Magic players. A card's either broken or unplayable. There's no middle ground. I must be right at all times.
The days of being excited to brew with venerated Rot Priest are long over. Now we hate the card. It's so tiresome.
Right.
Calling for bans, pitchforks up. Stupid Storm deck. So what we like to do at the end of our preview season and the beginning of our brewing season is kind of step back from thinking about all the cards and just try to zero in on the most exciting ones. Whether that's the best cards, whether that's the cards that just excite us the most. Last week, Mord and I talked about the 5 cards that excite us the most, and those are mainly focused on Modern. Today we're going to do something a little similar. Looking at Pioneer, we have David, our resident Pioneer Brewmaster, and he's done one better. He's got more than just a list of cards. He's actually got complete deck lists. 15 of them to be exact, although we're not going to talk about all of those today. We're just going to talk about, 4 or 5 maybe?
Yeah, so I think you're publishing an article or maybe posting it to Twitter or whatever. The article, if people want access to that, they can join. They can come to the website, or you can join the Faithless Brewing Patreon at patreon.com/Faithless Brewing. And one of the things you get is access to these ideas. There's a lot of ideas in the Discord, people kicking around concepts, throwing out cards, stuff that you wouldn't even consider. And this is the time when you really want to keep an open mind, right? Because everything gets tunnel vision once a deck succeeds. Oh, that's the way you always must build the deck. Dan and I talk about this all the time, these orthodoxies that build up. Right now, there's no orthodoxies. We don't know even what the best cards in this set are. We don't know what the best cards that go with those cards are. And this is a time when your mind is free, well lubricated. And so ideas from the Discord, ideas from other people on Twitter, maybe people saying a card is great that you thought was unplayable. Well, that's a pretty good player making those claims, right? That's when you want to maybe stop and think. Dan says a card is fascinating to him that I had dismissed immediately. Okay, that's a time for me to reconsider. Maybe I still think I'm right and he's wrong, or maybe there's something I'm not thinking about. So this is a great time to talk about lists. There's a ton of discussion on our Discord, as I said. There's a ton of discussion on Twitter. this is just our contribution to that, right? Just ideas that we have right now when we don't know anything.
Yeah, exactly. Great time to jump in the Discord. And of course, Patreon is just a nice way to support the podcast. So maybe after reading this article, you think, hey, good job, David. Here's $1. Patreon.com/Faithless Brewing. That's where you can sign up. We'd love to see you there.
Or bad job, David. I want to ridicule you in the Discord. That's worth something to me.
Exactly. If you want to make it personal.
That's fine too. Yeah.
Direct access. All right. So the first card that I want to talk about is one that just slipped past our previews. I think it came out on like the last hour of the preview week and we'd already recorded our episodes. I want to talk about the card All Will Be One.
Yeah, fascinating card, right? So 3 red. Whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to an opponent or a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Now, it doesn't say any target, I guess, in case your opponent's permanents can't be targeted, you'd have to target yourself. So it's functionally, you can think of it as it can do it to any target, but you can't target your own creatures and you can't target yourself. Maybe there's some infinite combos it's stopping.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah, it's an inelegant wording, but functionally you can target your opponent's creatures, your opponent's planeswalkers or them. Those are the things that you target with damage, right? So worth noting, when something comes into play with counters, that triggers this. So the first thing that Dan and I kind of thought of was planeswalkers. When Chandra Torch of Defiance comes into play, it comes into play with 4 counters. You get to do 4 damage wherever you want. That's pretty sweet. Every time you activate a plus ability on a planeswalker, +1 Chandra, that does 1 damage wherever you want before you even resolve the ability of the planeswalker. So that's kind of what got my mind going, right? Is that's really powerful. Can we afford to take turn 4 or 5 off to play this card? That's the big question, right? So you have people, I think, proposing ways to cheat it into play, things that can create counters the turn it comes into play, so you're kind of doing something. But yeah, this card is very powerful, very unique, right? We've never seen this effect before. And again, it's a very mid-rangey effect, which is why I like it. It's a card that really wants you to interact with the board.
It's almost like a red doubling season, like color shifted, where instead of just giving more counters, it's giving that pandemonium, fleeing some damage around. Yeah,
that's a great comparison. And doubling season, typically you're playing cards that win that game, win that turn. And so it tends to not be as fun as people think it is. Oh, you can do all these sweet value plays. It's like, hey, but are you just winning this turn? Because I'm not going to let you do anything. I'm going to hit concede. This card does not really let you do that, or I couldn't find a way to win the next turn. There's lots of ways to functionally put yourself way ahead after you take a full turn off to do nothing, and that's kind of where our thought process went to.
Like, what's the most counters you can get out of a single card for All Will Be One? In Pioneer, I'm not sure. Like, Dark Depths comes with 10 counters, so that's 10 damage in Legacy, but that's probably not realistic. You have 2 approaches. One is to choose cards like Planeswalkers that come with a decent chunk of counters and then gain more counters every turn via the loyalty abilities. Or you have stuff that, maybe just adds a counter every turn.
Yeah, and I actually believe the way that cumulative upkeep works, they actually get counters now.
Oh, yeah.
So in Modern, maybe that's a possibility. I know there's that red enchantment that gets a counter, or it creates red mana equal to the number of cumulative upkeep counters it has every upkeep.
Braid of Fire, yes.
Braid of Fire, yeah. So, but again, that's only adding a counter turn. Other Vials adding a counter return, right? That's not quite enough. It's not maybe even killing a creature. Just plinking your opponent for 1 we know is not particularly powerful.
So as sweet as all this sounds, is it realistic to play a 5-mana quote-unquote do nothing enchantment? I mean, that the turn that I spend 5, I'm not necessarily getting anything out of it. Or am I? That's the question. So how do I get it in play in a timely fashion? And then what am I getting paid off for?
Yeah, so the first card that really interested me was Tablet of Completion. So Dan laughed at me. Maybe he's right to do so. 2-mana artifact, tap, put an oil counter on it, and then tap, make a colorless mana. You can only do this ability if you have 2 or more oil counters on it. And then 1 mana, tap it to draw a card. You can only do that if you have 5 oil counters on it. So if you play it on turn 2, you might as well just tap it immediately to get that oil counter on. turn 3 still doesn't do anything. You must tap it again to make an oil counter. So on turn 4, it naturally curves into all will be 1. And so we're taking turn 2 off to play it instead of turn 3. So that's already just something that I'm somewhat interested in. Also worth noting, let's say we do that curve. We haven't played any other spells for some reason. It just naturally adds a counter every turn. So if we do X amount of damage, we just need 1 more to kill something. Just tapping Tablet does 1 to our opponent, 1 to a creature to finish it off, kills Thalia, kills Mana Elf, whatever. So that's already worth something. 2, Experimental Augury proliferates. So on turn 3, if we turn 2 Tablet, tap it, turn 3 we can Experimental Augury, proliferate Tablet. We actually can cast 4 mana worth of spells on turn 3. So it's not a great 2 mana rock, and we know how rare those are in Pioneer. But you can Experimental Augury Censor, Experimental Augury Abrade, right? You have options to do that. And then the Experimental Augury proliferating is adding counters. So if we have a Tablet of Completion and a Planeswalker in play, all will be 1 is going to actually do damage for each counter we're adding to these permanents. And then we have Planeswalker. So 4 mana Chandra is interesting to me. She comes into play with 4, so she does 4 under all will be 1. She is a ramp spell to all will be 1. So if you play her but you don't draw your 5th land, she lets you play all will be 1. She comes into play a -4. So if you imagine like you play all will be 1, your opponent has this huge board. You play Chandra, she does 4 to something. She -3, she does 4 to something else. You've actually like cleaned up a lot of what your opponent may have done without even having to cast a sweeper. Narset is a card that you have a hard time protecting sometimes. Narset is sweet under all will be 1. She comes into play. She does 5. She actually starts with a high amount of loyalty. So she sort of protects herself. She also finds all will be 1 if you play her early in the game, like in a mid-range matchup where maybe you censored their play, so the board happens to be clear. It's always great to play Narset on a clean board. And then Chandra Awakened Inferno is the most exciting to me. She's a card that's good against control because she can't be countered. With all will be 1, she comes into play with 6 loyalty, so she can kill all creature probably. Then she +2s, so she adds 2 loyalty. That does 2 damage anywhere, and then she starts the cycle of doing a damage to your opponent every turn. So even on an empty board, she does 8 to your opponent and does 1 every upkeep, even if she dies that turn. That's a ton of damage. So yeah, the deck is sort of, the lower end is Fiery Impulse, Censor, right? It's a little bit of ramp, and then it's just interaction of spells. We're main decking Anger of the Gods, which is going to be, I think, a very good card as people try out all these small creature decks in the new format. And then all will be 1 is just our big like Mirror Breaker. We can resolve it on turn 4 a myriad of ways. And once it's down, we've got all these Planeswalkers that come into play and immediately try to sort of recoup that value because we did lose a turn doing nothing.
I almost believe in this. The problem is it's so slow. Like, even with the considerations you've made.
Yeah, very slow.
There's just not much room for stuff at the lower end of the curve. And the only way to get more cheap interaction is to trim some of your payoffs. I do love these Thing of the Ice in the sideboard. I wonder if that's like a way to bridge the gap. That brings 4 counters with it. I think that's very clever. Although it doesn't work great with a Planeswalker angle. The other card that seems like it should work is Kiora, 3 mana Kiora, like instead of Narset. Unfortunately, neither Kiora nor Narset has a plus ability, so you can't actually add counters with them, but she ramps you to 5, she untaps your Tablet of Completion. You've used her to success in some Izzet builds in the past, whether with Glorybringer or Goblin Dark Dwellers, although those packages are maybe incompatible with the Planeswalker setup.
I thought about her in this list. I like Narset just because it gives you another angle. You do have the Narset Gaia Reach Santorum in your deck, just built in. And Narset as just a value card is a card that it almost does gain life because your opponent has to attack it in a way they don't for Kiora. So if you just play this on 3 and minus it to find a Chandra or a Sweeper or something, Kiora does not have a way to draw cards in this deck. And without the actual draw card ability, I don't think the untap ability is worth it.
I see.
But yeah, Thing in the Ice is really nice. Out of side, they should take all their removal out, and Thing in the Ice is just a fine card because we have a bunch of instants and sorceries. Yeah, it does come into play with 4 counters, and then you'll probably take out, for instance, some of your more expensive Planeswalkers against aggro decks, and then you'll be bringing in all these other instants and sorceries. So you could imagine like taking out the 6 mana Chandra against spirits, bringing in Thing in the Ice and Rending Volley, etc. And so you aren't really an all will be one deck. You just turn into more of like a full on control list.
You know, it's interesting. Just thinking of Kiora and counters, like the very next deck we have here in the lineup is full of counters and it has Kioras in it. And I'm like, you could put all both B1 into this Gruul ramp deck. Maybe that's like a different way to take advantage of it. It's an interesting card. Like, what kinds of things add counters of any type? Well, everything. Like, and they're not necessarily connected to each other. Apart from the proliferate mechanic, there's no reason to go gathering up cards that happen to add counters. So it's just cool brewing space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of random counters, we have a new type of counter called the oil counter. Oil counters accrue on individual permanents, and each permanent uses the oil counter in its own idiosyncratic way. For the most part, they don't interact with the oil counters on other permanents, with one exception. The card Filigree Sylex. It's a 2-mana legendary ratchet bomb. Instead of getting charge counters, it gets oil counters, and it has a third ability, which is tap, sack Filigree Sylex, and remove 10 oil counters from among all of your permanents. So anything that the Filigree Sylex itself had, plus if you have oil counters sitting on other permanents, that can help you get to 10. If you do that, you get to shoot anything 10 damage to any target.
Yeah, and so we talked about this card. Okay, it's a something with upside? What's the 2-mana artifact that already does all this?
It's kind of a ratchet bomb with upside, although legendary is a downside.
It is a ratchet bomb with upside. So we talked about like, all right, you don't normally have 2 ratchet bombs in play anyway, so this should just see play in that way. But I never really thought the 10 counters thing was realistic. So Frank Karsten, the mad scientist, Hall of Fame player, I think he works for WotC right now. He posted a screenshot that said this is a turn 4 kill with no attacking in standard. The picture had 2 Monumental Facade, 2 Copperline Gorge, a Filigree Sylex, assuming he played it on turn 2, and a Miglos Maze Crusher, and a Solphim Mayhem Dominus.
Mm-hmm.
So the Filigree Sylex comes into play, taps that turn, adds a counter. The 2 Facades have 2 counters each, that's 5. Miglos comes into play with 5, that's 10. So you can remove those 10 to do 10, and Solphim doubles them, so that does 20. And I was like, man, that is insane. Like, the thing that I immediately said to Dan was, yeah, okay, of course it's a cute little combo, and how many times you're going to have 2 Facades in your opening hand. But you don't have to play any bad cards. Like, Solphim is the closest card to a bad card, but we even thought, like, Miglos could see play as like a 1 of in red-green, like in Gruul. Like, that's not a hideous play. So that got me thinking, like, okay, what if we don't really need to do 20 though? We could have a deck that just does like 10 a reasonable amount of the time, plays the 4 Silexes, and the first Sylex is almost always going to do like 10 damage. And if you do like 10 damage, plus you play a couple Bone Crushers and shock them, that's actually really good. Or at least it's worth thinking about. So I built this list totally. I had not thought of it at all. And this is a Frank Karsten. Unless it's bad, then Frank, I apologize. I'll take all the blame. So this is a red-green list that's playing the full 4 Monumental Facade. And then it's playing actual like burn that can go to the face, because we are playing a couple Solphim. So the Stomp of Bone Crusher Giant, the Trigger Bone Crusher Giant, by the way, if it's in play. 4 Play with Fire. Thundering Reiju is a card that does non-combat damage, so that gets doubled by Solphim. It also sees all the other counters, so it sees +1/+1 counters, it sees oil counters, etc. We're playing 4 Armored Scrap Gorger. That adds an oil counter every turn while giving us main deck graveyard hate. 4 Sylex, 3 Kiora, as Dan mentioned. It untaps Scrap Gorger, untaps Sylex, untaps Facade if you wanted to put an oil counter on something else. If you're proliferating or something, you want to have multiple bodies. 4 Bloated Contaminator. This is a card I propose a scales list. I know a lot of other people have Mana Elf into Scale, into Contaminator, into 3 mana Nissa, etc. Bloated Contaminator triggers Kiora. That's cool. Proliferates. It can get +1/+1 counters from Thundering Reiju. It can proliferate all of the other oil counters. Proliferating keeps Kiora alive for whatever that's worth. Miglos is another card that triggers Kiora. Has a bunch of oil counters. Thundering Reiju just does damage. We're just trying to do 10 to them, basically. So our Sylex is good. And then 2 Glorybringer, just good enough. Under Solphim, Glorybringer doubles damage, so it can kill Shieldred or whatever if you want. Kiora plus Glorybringer is just a fine like mid-range plan. And then 2 Thirsting Roots. It's a card that proliferate or find a basic land. I thought this card was kind of weak. Well, proliferating is really good in this deck, actually. And if we start moving, multiple oil counters around, it also just, we're playing 23 land plus a Spikefield Hazard plus 2 Thirsting Roots, so we will almost never be mana screwed. And then late in the game, Thirsting Roots is much better than a land, obviously. So
the Solphim is a card that is throwing me off here a little bit. So in our preview episode, we said compare Solphim to Torbran. Torbran, much better on all counts. Solphim only counts your non-combat damage, except that Solphim doesn't care what color the source is. So, there's the Filigree Sylex for 20 is theoretically possible. But in all other situations, you'd rather have a Torbran. Here, how many of these burn choices did you put in the deck because of the Solphim? Play with Fire, Stomp, Glorybringer, and Filigree Sylex. These are your cards that interact with Solphim's ability. Besides that, the Solphim is kind of just
Thundering Raiju as well.
Oh yeah, damage for equal to the amount of creatures with counters on them.
Yeah, modified creatures, not creatures with counters. But in this deck, it will be.
Okay, so do you feel like that's enough to make the Solphim? I guess it is technically indestructible if you sacrifice.
I think it's discard 2 cards.
Discard 2 cards, pay 4 life. Yeah, I mean it's not bad. 5/4 for 4. Okay, maybe it is fine.
I'm not only on the doubling thing. If you want to play 1 Solphim or none, I don't think that's wrong. I think I'd at least start with it because Frank's image, I gotta at least be true to the source here. I agree with you. I'm not a huge believer in this card, but yeah, it becomes indestructible against red-black, which is the kind of deck that might pick this kind of thing apart. It is nice to make it indestructible against mono green. It just blocks all their 4/4s forever. It attacks through Lovestruck Beast. It blocks the 5/6 infinitely, etc. Doubling the damage, does it really matter that much? I mean, it does for the Filigree Sylex combo kill. Play with Fire doing 4, Stomp doing 4, Bone Crusher Giant being targeted doing 4. The Glorybringer doubling doesn't matter, really. I mean, 4 damage is killing most everything. So, I don't think I'm bending that much. It draws a card with Kiora. That's, just a reasonable thing to do. So, yeah, I'm not making that many choices. I'd want to play with Fires anyway, because I think we're not going to do 20 damage most of the time. And going to the face, but not being able to kill a 3 toughness creature is worth it to me.
So the other concern I have about this build is if we're accepting that 10 damage is more likely than 20, I worry that we're a little bit slow out of the gates. We actually don't have any mana elves in the deck. There's no 1-drops. So I'm not convinced that we will be in the aggressive role in every matchup. And if that's the case, what if I actually can't deal another 10 damage? So I'm wondering if I should instead say, all right, forget the top end of the curve. Play Elvish Mystic. Play the oily experiment one. What's that called? Evolve
the
adaptive something.
Yep.
Where maybe that is a better source than Armored Scrapgorger. It just comes down early and does more damage. You can get in 2, 3, 4 chip damage with that in the early turns of the game, and it just gets you closer to that 10 damage threshold, and then the Sylex takes you the rest of the way. And if I do that, then maybe I'm less interested in Kiora, I'm less interested in Glorybringer, and I have just a smaller, more aggressive curve.
Yeah, the problem with that is, first of all, I think to do the Sylex thing, you need to play the 4 Monumental Facades, and then it becomes hard to always have turn 1 mana elf in a red-green list. So then maybe you don't want to play, or your red splash gets very small. So, okay, we don't have mana elves, but we do have Play with Fire, which kills a mana elf. Our deck is entirely immune to shock or stomp from our opponent. And Scrapgorger is a main deck graveyard hate card. In addition to all that, so again, this is my total bias. I like my decks to be a lot more interactive. The problem, well, not the problem, but the factors of the deck you're proposing is that it is much more all in on the Sylex kill. Whereas this deck can just win a game where we never activate Sylex. We can play with Fire their mana elf, we can play an Armored Scrapgorger, and then just play a Thundering Raiju on that turn and attack their Karn that they minused and kill it. And make our guy big enough that their boat can't hit it. And we play a Glorybringer and kill a creature. We can just play a fair game, and eventually you draw Sylex on turn 10. Normally it's a terrible draw to draw your, artifact that has to gear up. It's you might just have 10 oil on the battlefield already. It just taps to do 10.
Yeah, I guess the way that you've built your deck, also the Sylex is just better removal in your deck because you're a little bit higher on the curve, and just using Sylex defensively for 1 or 2 is less likely to hurt you the way that you've constructed this deck.
Yeah, so like against mono white, I would expect to be activating Sylex to not do 10 damage. I would expect to like a bad sweeper, like blowing up 2 mana creatures or something like that. Is a very reasonable way to go about it. And with like Thirsting Roots or Bloated Contaminator, you have a way to kind of get it at the right level, like faster than your opponent thinks.
True.
And then, that gives you time to turn on your whatever Maglaws or whatever the heck else you're trying to do.
Yeah, the Monumental Facade can add the oil counter to anything, right? So you can use that to put a surprise counter on the Sylex, plus a Thirsting Roots, plus a Kiora untap. You can immediately, do CMC3 with the Sylex if you need to.
And like, it also can modify things for Thundering Raiju. Like, if you just have a couple of Armored Scrap Gorgers and then you like put a Facade counter on Bone Crusher Giant, you play a Thundering Raiju attack, it doesn't count the number of attacking modified creatures. It counts the number of modified creatures.
Oh, really?
So Thundering Raiju can attack for, 6 damage or whatever.
Oh, I didn't realize that the modified creatures do not have to be attacking.
Yeah, so if we just whatever, turn 1 we play a land, turn 1 they play an elf, we kill it, turn 2 we play a Scrap Gorger, turn 2 they play something in a land, or in another elf. Like if we play Thundering Raiju and attack, it just does 3, plus it puts a +1/+1 counter on itself, plus it triggers if there's a Scrap Gorger in play. So that's just, we're not talking about Magical Christmas Land here. It's just a really fast clock all of a sudden. So the doubling of that damage with Solphim is also, not trivial. So maybe that's why you weren't thinking that was that impressive. Like it's possible it's doubling like 3 or 4 damage with the Raiju.
Yeah, that makes a difference. I didn't compute that when I was initially looking at the deck. All right.
Yeah, Raiju like saw a lot of play in Standard, but wasn't quite good enough for Pioneer. So like you and I just aren't familiar with this card. So I've never actually cast it, but I had to read that multiple times. Like, oh, so if I just have a bunch of tapped Scrap Gorgers, or I've just randomly put like a Facade counter on a Bone Crusher Giant just to proliferate it matters for Raiju.
Nice.
Solphim gets an indestructible counter. That's another modified creature.
Okay. All right. Very cool. I'm a believer.
All right. On to the next one here. Dan and I love spending a lot of mana. Mindsplice Apparatus. Dan, I think you were the first person I ever heard say Wilderness Reclamation is totally broken. I can't believe they printed it uncommon. And it turned out to be as powerful as you thought, maybe even more powerful. Mindsplice Apparatus has like fixed Wilderness Rec vibes for me, maybe, where it's adding 2 to 4 mana a turn way faster than you'd think. But we can play sorceries instead of just instants, right? It adds a lot less mana, but the restrictions of what you can use the mana on are a lot less. Am I fairly characterizing this card or what?
Gosh, I mean, going straight to Wilderness Rec, what a comparison.
What's a fixed Wilderness Rec?
Wilderness Rec, mana doubler, very few restrictions on it. Mindsplice Apparatus, it can be more than a mana doubler, but that's provided you have stuff to spend the mana on. Like, I don't know if there's any other card that provides this much cost reduction. I can't think of anything that does. So I've never actually been presented with the opportunity to get a 3, 4, or 5 mana discount on all of my instants and sorceries.
Yeah, so again, Dan talks about this all the time. Best in class, unique ability. This is a card that does something exactly like you said, Dan. It doesn't really do something we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing Goblin Electromancer reducing our spells by 1 or whatever. We're not used to seeing something where if it stays in play for a couple turns, it's reducing things by 2 or 3 mana. And if we cast 4 mana spell that's reducing by 3 and a 4 mana spell reducing by 3, it's creating 6 mana that turn, or whatever. So it gets the mind working, right, to see what we can do with this card.
Yeah, exactly.
So the first thing I wanted to do is increase the rate at which this thing is reducing my spells. The turn after you play Mindsplice Apparatus, and it does have Flash. I think without Flash, it's unplayable. Wilderness Rec gave you the mana back right away. Fires gives you 4 mana the turn you play it. This does not do that. So you have to take a turn off. Now your opponent doesn't know it, but you're letting them resolve their 3 or 4 drop that they're, oh, is this my bait spell? It's like, I don't have a counter spell. This was a bluff. I'm Mindsplice Apparatus on end of turn. I get a counter. So on turn 5, or when the turn you play your 5th land, you have a -1 to all your spells. We're hoping to accelerate that turn with Growth Spiral, but the first thing I want to do is cast Experimental Augury. Experimental Augury is so sweet with this card. It costs a blue to cast on that upkeep, and then it pays for itself that turn. So it's a free spell. It's like a Manamorphose, if you want to think of it that way. But a Manamorphose that looks at your top 3 to find another spell, in theory, that Mindsplice Apparatus is reducing. So those cards are cards I want to play together. 4 Growth Spiral, 4 Experimental Augury, 4 Mindsplice Apparatus. I will negotiate on any other card in this list, but not those. So now what do we need? We need to interact with our opponent. So I want cards that have Kicker because I want a modular spell, something that's efficient to play on turn 2. I don't have a Mindsplice Apparatus in play yet, but in the late game, I want to be able to extract some value out of these plays. So a card like Fires of Victory, very interesting to me. 1 in a red does damage equal to the cards in your hand. Okay, on turn 2, that kills any 2 or 3 mana spell your opponent plays, right? But on turn 5, it draws a card, and maybe it only costs like 3 mana to kill Shieldred or something. Sweltering Sun's a cycling card. So in the matchups, it's good, it's great. Well, we have all this extra mana lying around. We just cycle it and turn it into something that we can use the mana for. Fight with Fire. Okay, in the early game, 2 in a red does 5 damage. All right, it's not great, but it kills Shieldred. It kills, whatever 3 or 4 drop our opponent has in play. Once we reduce mana on this, it's actually pretty easy to fully kick it. If we're talking about an 8 mana spell that does 10 damage, maybe we can reduce it by 2 or 3. So we're talking about a 7 mana spell that does 10 damage. We only need to resolve 2 of them to kill our opponent. And I have Behold the Multiverse. Again, you can put it into exile at 2 mana early in the game. Late game, you can cast it just for blue. Look at your, scry 2, look at 2. Commit to Memory, or even Mystical Dispute, which is a card while Wilderness Wreck used. Commit to Memory, once Mindsplice Apparatus is down, it's just an amazing counter spell. It's like blue, counter anything unconditionally to the top of their deck, or any permanent. But then the memory half means we don't run out of cards. Dan pointed out when we were talking about this during spoiler season, can't run out of cards with this because we don't want to have all this mana and no place to go.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest disagreement we had, was where is the cards going to come from? And I had initially said Memory Deluge because I can flash it back. You said, no, not that. Let's play Behold the Multiverse instead. I said maybe Pieces of the Puzzle is the way we want to go, but I think that Commit to Memory is the better than all of those combined. And it just completely never even occurred to me. But exactly like you're saying, the front half, Commit, is sort of playable at 4 mana. It's overcosted only by 1 mana. Like, it's removal for any permanent.
Yeah, if it costs 3, that card would be insane.
Yeah, so even just having that be a follow-up play, the turn you flash in Mindsplice Apparatus, play Commit for 3, or for 2 if you got the Augury to proliferate, that's your catch-up turn. And then, 2-3 turns later, memory reduced by that much doesn't end the turn, right? It's not Days Undoing. You actually just pay 2 or 3 mana, draw a fresh 7, and you're just going to go off from there. I think it's like the perfect card. It's a huge find for this deck.
Yeah, I found it really late. I had almost had the list posted and was ready to send it. And then I was looking at the old Wilderness Wreck list, and I noticed they were playing 3 main deck Mystic Disputes. And it was like, oh, because if we untap, you might as well just have a card that's awesome in the actual mirror. But then when you have all the mana, it's like 3 mana leak isn't the end of the world if I'm going to have 6 mana untapped on my end step anyway. Exactly with this. 4 mana is not great, but it's not terrible, right? It's not a bogus card. But once you have Mindsplice Apparatus, it does everything. It's great against decks that want to attack you on the stack. It's great against the guy who resolved Shieldred, when you took your turn off. It does it all. And the memory, you can maybe win that turn, right? Normally, your opponent gets to draw 7. The 6 mana is supposed to mean that they kind of get the first use of those cards. Well, if you reduced it by enough, you might be able to Fight with Fire combo kill them that turn. So yeah, I don't know how many you want to play, but this is my starting point.
I kind of want to play 4. Is that crazy?
I mean, 4 seems high, but I could be talked into the 3rd for sure. And then we're playing 6 MDFCs. Solundi Vision, another super sweet card to help us find our Commit to Memories once we're online. Ajori Disruption, you just need cheap interaction. So we have 30 possible lands in our deck because we want to hit every land drop up to probably 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think that's the other big find for this deck, is realizing that these overcosted MDFC spells are perfect with the apparatus. So Solundi to help you find the combos. You could even play Valakut Awakening if you think you're going to be needing red lands more early. If you think you need green lands for the growth spirals, The Balagad recovery is not that bad. So these are all options. There is the question of like how many tap lands can you afford? You also have to play the Triomes, and keep in mind that MDFCs cannot be put in with a growth spiral. So you have to like account for all that when checking to make sure you have enough growth spiral lands. But yeah, I'm wondering if like between all this card selection and the ability to time twister with memory, that you should actually trim your finisher slots to like the bare minimum. Like right now you're playing 2 Fight with Fires, 3 expansion explosions. What if you don't need all those? What if you just need 1 Fight with Fire and 1 expansion explosion? Is that crazy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like Fight with Fire the first time around, we're just going to cast on 3 mana to kill something, like kill their Shieldred. You really have to kill Shieldred in this deck. We cannot win if Shieldred's in play. I could certainly cut the expansion explosion. That maybe 2 is the number there. I literally just looked at the Wilderness Reckless. They played 3. I didn't try to get any cuter than that, honestly. I didn't. I should have maybe thought about it more. But yeah, maybe cut that to 2.
Well, they get shuffled back, so you only need the 1 because it keeps getting put back in the deck, in theory.
Yeah. Well, yeah, then if we go up commit to memory. Again, I don't like being super naked. I'd probably still play 2 no matter what, but maybe turn the 3rd one into a commit to memory. Or another like interactive type of spell. But yeah, then worth noting that the expansion, the combo ability, checks the cost of the spell on the stack. So a kicked Fight with Fire is still a 3 CMC spell. So depending on how much your reduction is, you just do 20 damage to your opponent out of nowhere. Or if obviously you've got a ton of reduction, you can do, the blue, red, X them for a zillion. But the plan really is to Fight with Fire, kick it. Let's say it only costs 5 mana, and then just red, copy it. You do 20 to your opponent out of nowhere. It just seems so sweet to me.
Yeah, I think Kicker is perfect for this. Doubling Fight with Fire, just the modality of Fires of Victory. I mean, yeah, it all works. So surprisingly, I think this deck will actually work really well. It's different from what I've seen other people propose. Like most of the people who talk about Mindsplice Apparatus at all assume that you have to play extra turn spells. And here you're saying, no, I'm just going to like play control spells.
Well, that's where I started. But the problem is you're taking turn 4 off to do nothing. You're playing Mindsplice Apparatus. And then turn 5, you're casting a turn spell. Maybe. But like, then what? Like, if your opponent casts Thalia on turn 2 and mono white always has it, on turn 5 casting Mindsplice Apparatus, and then turn 6 casting a turn spell, maybe. That just doesn't do it for me. Like, I started with the turn shell build, but it's like it's a shell that's weak against aggro, and it's a shell that's weak against control. Right? So it's like, what are we even good against? We're only good against mid-range decks if they don't draw Thoughtseize. That's a really weird place to be, to my way of thinking.
The theory is that you take 1 extra turn and then you take another one and you just never give them the turn back. But that requires playing like 8 or sometimes 10 extra turn spells. They're super expensive. They're clunky.
Right. And so against control, those are hard to resolve, even with reduction. I mean, resolving Mindsplice Apparatus against control is not a given, right? So, okay, we know that might not happen. Lotus Field can actually just kill you. They're just going to go for it. And then aggro is disruptive. Like, mono green is like coming for you. You can't just like do nothing. Turn 4, Mindsplice Apparatus. Turn 5, take a turn. Like, okay, you better win. Like, you actually, and a lot of them, these turn spells don't actually kill your opponent. Like, okay, take a turn, make 2 birds. Like, all right, attack you for 2. Okay, I'm at 18. Are you taking another turn? Because you really need to. I mean,
yeah. All right, I like this one. From Temur Mindsplice Apparatus, we move on to green-white. Oh gosh, green-white. You said this was the deck you were most excited about, and it's green-white.
I love Elesh Norn. I think this card is the most slept on. Like, people think it's a card for Commander or whatever. I think this card just blanks entire decks in the entire format. And I think having free wins against some decks is way better than people think. So I've seen a lot of people say, oh, Elesh Norn should see some play in Pioneer because it'll be like a one of tutor target for my Enigmatic Incarnation deck. And the reality is, for Elesh Norn means you cannot play Enigmatic Incarnation, you cannot play Karuga Fires. Like, these decks cannot kill this card. And if it resolves, their deck doesn't do anything. There isn't a single way they have in their entire 75, or in the case of these Urian Enigmatic Incarnation builds, 85. They can't kill Elesh Norn. So a Resolve Elesh Norn just wins the game. It beats these decks that have reasonable win percentages across the board. That's already something I'm interested in. So if I just find this card, then I win. And now can I shore up my other matchups so I don't lose? And it's like Elesh Norn has applications against green, right? Turns off their oaths, turns off their Kiora triggers, turns off all the stuff you get from Karn, right? None of those things come into play and do anything. Turns off the 5/6 finding a land and finding your Nykthos. It's very mediocre against red-black, but it does like a little bit of stuff. So this deck is just saying, I'm trying to resolve Elesh Norn. This is my goal. And every card in my deck is awesome with Elesh Norn, but it's playable without it. That's in general the thought process here. So 4 Portable Hole, right? Got to interact early. 4 Oath of Nissa. Oath of Nissa is insane underneath an Elesh Norn. So we don't turn off their Elesh. We turn off their Oath. Our Oath is a double ponder for green. Prosperous Innkeeper, right? So the life gain trigger doubles. It makes 2 treasures under Elesh Norn, so it's free. Ossification exiles 2 permanents under Elesh Norn, or it's just a 2-mana removal spell, like a slow terminate or dreadbore. 4 Kiora must have. Kiora into Elesh Norn draws 2. The game is functionally over, like I said, against a small but meaningful percentage of the format. Topiary Stomper has a come into play ability, find a basic land. If you have Kiora plus Elesh Norn in play, so it finds 2 basic lands and it draws 2. Llanowar Visionary, another card that helps us play Elesh Norn and turn early. Under Elesh Norn, it draws 2 extra cards. Touch the Spirit Realm. A 3-mana exile spell under Elesh Norn is very powerful, right? Get 2 permanents, but blinking Topiary Stomper, blinking Elesh Norn, blinking Asika's Chariot with Elesh Norn in play or not is super powerful. If you do this under Kiora, like if you imagine you have a Topiary Stomper and a Kiora in play and you just blink it with Touch the Spirit Realm, you cast a Rampant Growth that draws a card. Very good. For Asika's Chariot, card is obviously awesome under Elesh Norn. We know it's just a playable card. Also super cool with Prosperous Innkeeper. You just start drawing or gaining all this life. 1 Teleportation Circle. Like I said, all these come into play effects from artifacts and creatures. 4 Elesh Norn, and then 1 Storm the Festival, because eventually, our Topiary Stompers, etc., are just going to ramp us up. We'll be able to cast Storm the Festival even from the graveyard.
This is such a weird deck. I mean, if you told me I'm going to ramp into Elesh Norn and green and white, I'd be like, yeah, sure. The cards you're describing, these are not the typical cards you see in ramp. Like, Topiary Stomper was tried briefly in primitive versions of mono green. It's not a great card to have for the turns 1 through 6 when you don't have 7 lands in play. But, I mean, here you're getting that Kiora synergy. You're getting the ability to blink it. I think Touch the Spirit Realm is like a brilliant find here, where it's almost good enough just for the channel alone. The channel can be used offensively or defensively. It targets creatures or artifacts, so you can blink the Asika's Chariot if you have to. You can blink a Portable Hole if you, for some reason... Actually, no, you would never do that. But in theory...
No, you do sometimes. Sometimes, I've done it many times. Portable Hole, the 2/2 Goblin that Fable makes, and then blink it to get the 3/2 Vampire. I've done that in matches.
Oh, if you just didn't want to spend 3 for the Touch of Spirit Realm itself? Yeah. Okay. But what's surprising me about the build is that it's just kind of slow. Like, the ramp doesn't really start till turn 3. You get the Elesh Norn maybe turn 4. Whereas I would assume a ramp deck has to lead on at least Sylvan Caryatid, but preferably Llanowar Elves. And you're saying, no, I'm okay, just Prosperous Innkeeper is my only ramp on 1 and 2. Besides that, I'm just playing either Portable Hole or Oath of Nissa.
Well, ramp on 2 and ramp on 3 get you to Elesh Norn at the exact same time. You're still casting a turn 4 Elesh Norn, so those don't make that much of a difference.
But wouldn't I prefer to just have more options, be a little more ahead? Like, do I need all of these 3-mana rampers? Like, maybe I should change some of them into 2 or 1-mana rampers, like the Llanowar Visionaries, the Topiary Stompers. I don't know if I need so many copies of these.
Yeah, and maybe I mean, you might be right. The Llanowar Visionaries, maybe you could turn into Caryatids or something. I was just really worried about flooding out, but maybe between Oath and Chariot and stuff, you're fine.
The ossification here, I mean, I know I gave you a hard time about this when we were doing the preview shows because I'm not convinced that it's easy to get basic lands. And after we recorded that, someone asked me about, well, isn't ossification just worse than the pacifism from this set, like Planar Disruption, which is 1 and a white aura that enchants an artifact creature or planeswalker, says that it can't attack, block, or activate any abilities. Which I hadn't even considered this card really for constructed, but Planar Disruption actually is pretty good. And after all that, you've managed to find the one deck where ossification is like much better than all these because it doubles.
It doubles. We have Topiary Stomper to find basics. So we're playing 7 basics plus Topiary Stomper. So we're functionally playing 11 basics plus Oath can find a basic.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It is also worth noting that the card you're describing does not stop Shieldred. So in this deck, where we're going to be drawing a shit ton of cards with Elesh Norn, we definitely want to be ossificationing Shieldred or Touch of the Spirit Realming Shieldred. We don't want to be pacifying it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right about Elesh Norn not just being an engine for yourself, but actually shutting down a lot of the existing strategies in Pioneer. People haven't done the work yet of actually sitting down and figuring out how much the matchup changes when I'm going to play Elesh Norn on turn 4.
Yeah. And then, like, lots of people can't kill it easily. That's the other thing. Like, mono white can't kill it. So it doesn't stop mono white, but mono white only has come into play triggers to kill Elesh Norn. So Elesh Norn lives. So if they don't kill you that turn, you know, next turn Prosperous Innkeeper plus Seeker's Chariot gains 16. Like, back to you.
Does it really gain 16?
Chariot makes 4.
Mm-hmm. Innkeeper.
Oh, yeah, you get 8.
Oh, boy. That's pretty sweet.
All right, and then finally, you and I have been kicking around cards with this Unctus. A bad name, but a name nonetheless. Unctus Grand Metatect.
Oh, yes.
So it does a lot of things. It gives your blue creatures this ability to loot other blue creatures you have. Whenever it becomes tapped, draw a card, discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. So it's a lord for artifact creatures. It gives these blue creatures this ability. And then for a Phyrexian blue mana, so either a blue mana or 2 life, it can make a creature an artifact blue creature until end of turn. And it can only do it sorcery speed, but it gives either a blue creature that it was already in play, it can make it an artifact, it gets +1/+1. An artifact creature in play can make it blue, so when it taps, it loots, or it can make a creature who's neither of those things, both of those things for the turn. So what to do with this card is unclear, and I sent you a bunch of different shells, one where it's more of just like a lord that gives you some looting ability. This is a loose proposal I have. I'm not really sure exactly that I like it or not, but Emry and Unctus are interested to me because Emry naturally taps. When she taps, it puts an extra card in the graveyard, so maybe she can find something else. Paradox Engine is a card I want to cast from the graveyard or in play. Paradox Engine and Emry are obviously very powerful together. Chief Engineer lets you tap your blue creatures proactively under Unctus. You know, you can play Unctus on turn 3 after Chief Engineer, tap them both, play a 2-mana artifact, and you get to loot at least once. The rest of the deck is just like artifact stuff. I'm not really sure. Moonsnare Prototype is again a way to tap our blue creatures under Unctus. And then the Paradox Engine, Emry combo, you know, if you have a Mox Amber or a Tormod's Crypt, you can just loot through your entire deck, cast every spell. If you deck yourself, you can Thassa's Oracle to win. You can find other Flux Reservoir, go through your deck that way. If you set up the loop without Unctus, you can play an Altar of the Brood, and you're putting an infinite amount of permanents in play. You loot your opponent that way. If you cast an infinite amount of artifacts with Patchwork Automaton in play, you can crew it up with Shadow Spear that turn and kill them. So yeah, I don't know what to do with this card, but I'm fascinated by it. There's so much text, it feels like it has to be doing something.
So Chief Engineer is 1 in a blue, 1/3 Artificer. It says artifact spells you cast have Convoke. That becomes like one of the best ways to tap things for Unctus, because Unctus doesn't naturally provide any way for you to be like tapping these other blue creatures. If you have Oval Chase Daredevil, right, you've got 2 copies of Daredevil here, I could, in theory, tap my Chief Engineer to convoke any artifact in play. When I tap the Engineer, Unctus triggers. I draw one, discard my Overchase Daredevil. Then the artifact that I cast resolves, enters play, Daredevil comes back to my hand. So I've just functionally drawn a card. If I didn't have the Daredevil, it's just a loot, so I haven't drawn a card, but I've purified my card quality. So like Chief Engineer is like weirdly the most important creature, is that fair to say? For like going off with Unctus, because you can keep doing it again and again. If you don't want to do that, I mean, Emry naturally tapping makes sense. Like Emry just going off uncontested is good, but if you add an Unctus, you're looting, so you're getting like a little more value. And then you have the supplemental chappers in the form of the Moonstar prototype and the Springleaf Drum. I mean, it's weird. It's just a weird combination. Like Chief Engineer almost wants you to play artifact creatures instead of just artifacts. You know what I mean?
Well, the problem though is that the Chief Engineer line you have where you functionally drew a card with Overchase Daredevil, you're not doing anything to affect the board. So, okay, you're playing all these artifacts. Like, what are you doing then, right? So I think you need to be ramping to the Reservoir or Paradox Engine or some kind of artifact that wins or puts you in a position to win. Because all this other stuff is just, again, moving stuff from one place to another. And it doesn't do anything, right? The board has not been affected. You've cast a 2-mana artifact on turn 3, and you have an extra card in your hand but one of them is an Overchase Daredevil that you can't cast. So now, okay, now you've passed the turn back. Now what are you going to do next turn? Okay, you're going to do it again. But these looting effects don't do anything unless it adds up to something. And you have to resolve an artifact every turn to get the Overchase Daredevil back to your hand.
So the proposal, the full combo proposal, we were debating this yesterday. According to Will Urker, right, the way to build Unctus is you use Chief Engineer and Unctus, but instead of playing all the non-creature artifacts like Moonstar Prototype, Soul Guide Lantern, Mox Amber, etc., cut all that stuff and use all those slots to play artifact creatures. So you have Ornithopter, you have Stonecoil Serpent, you have Silver Raven, Ginger Brute. These cards are a joke, of course, but the point is that when I cast them, when I do that little thing where I loot, I discard the Daredevil, put the Daredevil back in my hand, I've actually increased my board presence by 1 additional creature. And because of Chief Engineer, I'm representing a lot of mana for next turn, a lot of Convoke mana for next turn. And there's even some theoretical Christmas land where I played enough Ornithopters and Stonecoil Serpents for 0, because Unctus gives it +1/+1, that I've actually like just randomly accumulated enough mana during a single kind of Glimpse of Nature style turn that I can actually cast the Reservoir, the Aetherflux Reservoir, or the Paradox Engine in that same turn. So he's saying, what if I just win on turn 3? I don't know if that's actually realistic. The difference is that I filled my deck with absolute garbage creatures. Like, Moonstar Prototype at least does something. Silver Raven does almost nothing.
Will Urker's list does not have a Paradox Engine.
Right. He just has Reservoir.
Right.
Yeah.
It has 1 Reservoir. So you have to resolve the Reservoir, and then you just have to continue to cast creatures, because Reservoir hasn't gained you any life yet. You cast all these other spells. Yeah, I would need to see that happen once in a blue moon. I don't think that's even feasible to do. Not to mention, of course, it's disrupted by everything. Again, this building your deck where you can only win if specifically Unctus is in play and is not touched. They don't have a Braid, they don't have Fatal Push, they don't have Counterspell, they don't have enchantment removal. I like this shell a little bit more because you can win without Unctus. You could just Emry Paradox Engine and win the game, right? You don't need to do all this other stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that I thought was actually kind of cute about going the creature route is that both Silver Raven and Network Disruptor are just like 1/1 flyers that happen to be blue and artifact creatures. So just having that and then playing Unctus on turn 3, forget the Chief Engineer, gives you a 2/2 flyer that loots when it attacks. And maybe that's actually like another angle, because you've been interested in like ninjas before, and both of those 1/1 flyers support ninjas.
Okay, I'm listening.
Could that be like another direction to take the Unctus?
Yeah, I think it has like real applications as a lore. The other card I'm really interested in, I'm going to space on the name. It's 1 blue for a 2/1. Whenever you draw your second card, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then when it dies, you get a Thopter. I have a couple of them in a few of the builds that I proposed. That card is really good also under Unctus, right? So you play it as a 2/1. They don't really want to kill it. It makes a Thopter. You play Unctus. It naturally draws your second card by attacking. So it attacks as a 3/2, or if Unctus wants to make an artifact for the turn, it can attack for 4. So that's like a reasonable clock, and it's going to get bigger every turn. And then when it dies, it makes a Thopter, which is an artifact that Unctus pumps. So it's weirdly like a good aggro plan. Do you know the card I'm talking about, Dan?
I think it's called Thopter Mechanic. Is that right?
Yeah. So I've been like kicking it around as like a card that wasn't that bad. And just like imagining those play patterns is actually interesting, right? Like,
so an Unctus has the ability to turn any creature of yours into a blue artifact until the end of the turn. So that's for 2 life. So you can kind of boost it by +1/+1 whenever you want.
Yes.
That's kind of interesting.
At sorcery speed. So you cannot do it in response to removal.
Oh, it's sorcery speed. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So you can boost it or not, but even just like a 2-mana 3/2 that's going to grow every turn, and when it dies, it makes a 2/2 flyer. Again, this is all assuming Unctus is in play, but that's not bad. That's actually like quite reasonable. So like I play Thopter Mechanic, you play your 3/2 Vampire with Blood. I attack with Thopter Mechanic as a 3/2. Like I'm actually winning the race by a ton against Red Black. They have to kill Unctus or they have to kill this thing. So that's kind of an avenue I want to explore, and we'll probably have an Unctus week at this point because you and I have spent so much time noodling on it. But
I was trying to resist having Unctus week. That's why I wanted to like do it today. But unfortunately, there's more to explore. Gosh, I'm like, man, what if I have like a Scrap Heap Scrounger in this aggro blue-black deck? Like that's a way to get more pressure from the looting effects. It's a 4/3 off Unctus. I don't know. Jeez. It's a very interesting card.
Something, yeah. Like Saheeli -2ing with Unctus, it just makes 2/2 flyers haste. Like, I don't know. There's just something, right? There's not nothing.
Oh, the 4-mana Saheeli, the Filigree Master.
Yeah. So you go like Thopter Mechanic, Unctus, attack for 4 if you want. And then next turn you Saheeli -2, make 4 flying blockers, and then Thopter Mechanic can attack as a 5.
All right, Unctus, fine. You're on the schedule. Get your Unctus brews ready. We're coming back for more. But we better wrap it up today. I think we're out of time. So, David, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Excited to see how these decks test now that we can finally jump into the leagues. And we'll let you all know how that turns out.
Absolutely. Should be a blast. Best time of the year.
All right, take care.
All right, take care.
Deck lists for this episode can be found at our homepage, faithlessbrewing.com. And tune in next time for a look at the latest technology in Modern and Pioneer from Phyrexia All Will Be One. Support for this podcast is provided by brewers like you. Join the Faithless family and help support the show at patreon.com/faithlessbrewing for Discord access, bonus content, and more. That's all for today. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.